Hello and welcome to Wixoss Diva Live episode 6 review. I'm Cullen.
And I'm Honey Panda Bunny. This episode was pretty good, but not my favourite so far. I still think I prefer the last one, but we are starting to get a bit of darker vibes here, which I know a lot of people were looking forward to and hoping for, which I am certainly interested too, though I hope it has given quite a light dab in the beginning of this series, so I'm hoping that that doesn't get marred by how dark it is as well. I do think this is more of a hopeful series than the previous Wixosses. I think I kind of like that about this version.
So I will say that for the first half of the series, it's been fairly light. I had my guard less down just because of the more lighter aspects of the series. This episode definitely has shades of the earlier series, and it's definitely the most darkest one we've got so far. But I don't necessarily think it is going to now take a darker path in this second half. I think that this is a personal story, and that's why the tone is so dark for this one. But then again, we are now at around the halfway point of the series, so whether this is gradually shifting to a darker tone in the second half remains to be seen. And it wasn't just in the subject matter as well. This episode felt very different from the framing of the shots. It gave me very Selector and Vector Wixoss vibes. And we literally see it in the very first scene with Madoka, and she's stabbing her phone because she can see Rei in her No Limit outfit. And then another girl, Sanga, she puts her hand in front of it and she gets stabbed. And we even see blood here, which is something we've not seen at all in this series so far. And Madoka also talks about how she wants to make them pay. It really does set the tone for the rest of this episode, and it gave me shades of Akira stabbing Yurif with a pen in the original, and characters being wrought with emotions. This was something the earlier series has dabbled in very heavily.
So as you mentioned with the Akira and Yulif, it also reminded me of their kind of twisted relationship almost. It does give me a lot of those vibes with those two, as we see throughout the episode as well, especially when they're explaining their backstory with Rei. We get to see maybe some puppeteering going on by Sanga in the back scenes, which is interesting.
Yeah, we do see that Sanga seems to take care of Madoka. She's always holding her and always trying to be supportive, but it's framed there's something more going on there. Madoka's design also reminded me very much of Miraloon of the original, and that's something that is throughout this episode, is there is a lot of callback to the original, and it feels very intentional. So after the opening, we see a flashback of Rei, and this establishes her thought process, as she is the focal character of this episode. And for her, as we already know, it's not about winning or losing, it's about giving your all. It's why she left her previous teams. They weren't motivated or really cared. For her, someone who is very passionate about Wixoss, she doesn't like people not putting their heart into it. I'm also wondering, we see this flashback, so how this will play into her past history with Sanga and Madoka.
It also seems that Madoka and Sanga are very interested in Wixoss, so I'd like to see what Rei meant within the episode when she said she was never like this. I'm really interested to see where Madoka's driving force came from and how Rei might have either misseen how interested they were in Wixoss, or whether someone's actually puppeteering what happened in the back.
It's what makes this episode so interesting, is there's so much going on in it, so many aspects, Rei's past history, these two's relationship. There's lots of follow-up from the previous episodes as well, as they are now practicing for their diva time, and it's very love live in these scenes, especially with the montage and how they're planning it out. Akino has wrote the lyrics, and it turns out that Rei had already composed a song. This is a surprise, but because of the episode, we see that there's a really good reason that she's not talked about this before, just due to her previous teammates. There's obviously some bad history here that makes it difficult for her to talk about. And I do really like this scene. It's a nice break between the more dramatic scenes, and it's another really strong aspect of this episode that I find it did a really good job of balancing the lighter and the more darker aspects of the episode.
Yeah, it is really interesting to see Akino be the one to write the lyrics and Rei obviously make the song. So which leads me to believe that I think Hirana's going to do the choreography, because it's been shown that she's a sporty character, so it would make sense that they all have an equal play here.
So we see that Rei's perception as a diva has also been changed, because during a conversation with Hirana and some schoolmates, they've been seeing No Limit, they've been getting really interested in them, and there are people now seeing Rei as more cool rather than being cold. They wonder if the real Rei is cute, and we do see that Rei in the scene as well, she's blushing at their words.
I think we're slowly getting to a point where maybe Rei's going to come to the exception of where she actually reveals that she is Rei. I know that sounds really weirdly worded, but I've always wanted this, that she'll come to this kind of understanding that she would need to reveal herself eventually. So I'm excited to see if that actually does happen.
I do find it funny that No Limit, which is Hirana, Akino and Rei, and then in their very own classroom there's Hirana and Akino, and there's also a Rei, but they don't question the Rei in the classroom, which I find absolutely hilarious. So Rei is also very grateful for the other two, as just before they go into the Wixoss land, she never thought that people would see her like that. So No Limit Encounter universe is beginning, and I'm really happy happy that these characters have become reoccurring. They add so much more to the episode, I find. It makes the world feel more lived in, although I could also do with more card jockey as well. We also get a reference to Tama here as well, with Nova referring to her as an ancient Lorig. Some time has clearly passed, but I do think people should be careful with reading too much into this line, because Nova's dialogue tends to be very toony. She talks about how universes beginning are from the underworld, so I don't think we're super far in the future. I just think it's flavoury dialogue.
I'm actually really enjoying this No Limit and Universes Beginning having this close intertwined friendship and it continuing. I was almost worried that it was going to stop at Akino's episode, but it's really nice to see that they're both still hyping each other up when they pass each other in hallways.
I actually really like Akino goes to greet them. They obviously respond. Tamago's got her nickname for her, Achan, and Hirana's like, hey, how did you know each other? So it's cool that there's more going on in the world. It's in this scene that we get introduced to a new team, Diagram, who are facing Universes Beginning in the next match. Design-wise, these were the ones that I was least interested in, and they seem to be the most mixed matched. So we've got a dancer, we've got like a robot, and then a futuristic pilot. Out of the three, the only one that I really like is Sanga's design.
I'm not a big fan of any of the lyric designs really, but Musica's really nice. I think the favourite for me. I prefer her design to the other two. I absolutely despise Madoka. I absolutely despise her design. I want to like it because I love robot designs, but when she does her growing, she just gets these lightning bolt bits on her and it just looks really awkward and bad.
I do like Sanga's design just because especially in the battle, we see that her and Madoka's relationship are like that Japanese dramatic, the two ladies, but one plays the more masculine role. That's the role Sanga seems to give for me. It's just something about her design that really encapsulates that while also remaining quite feminine. That's the reason I like that one.
I think their fighting style's really interesting as well. Obviously you have Musica being the one that's up front, and then you have the other two acting as almost supports, but they're combined supports. They don't really tend to attack on their own. They tend to attack together, which I thought was really interesting. We've not really seen that with the other girls.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting dynamic. I actually do find that this team is the most interesting of the ones we've encountered so far. They're easily the one that was the most fleshed out in their debut. Mujika straight away, she's a bit of an airhead. I particularly laughed at Bang registering her under idiot and then her taking offence at that. Mujika is most similar to the earlier teams. She's fairly light-hearted and she seems to be the most least story relevant, but I did actually really like her role in this episode. With the other two, Madoka is clearly the most vengeance-seeking of the others, as she specifically targets Rei in their confrontation here. Sanga also seems to echo Madoka's feelings, but she seems less invested. It's not as passionate as Madoka is. Rei is very shaken up by meeting them and even just hearing their names. So we get to the battle, Universes Beginning versus Diagram, and this battle does feel a bit more of an afterthought, but I think this was done on purpose. This battle was just to establish Diagram, and in a way the battle reminded me of earlier series where it was more about the emotional stakes rather than what was happening actually on the field. The battle was kept fairly short, but we got to see headwise where Madoka and Sanga are, and as you mentioned, the two are very in sync with each other, and we see that they're also very dependent. Madoka kissing Sanga's hand, we see them dancing together, and they're even holding each other after the battle as well. So afterwards, Madoka has an interview, again is going on about her single-minded determination to take everything away from Rei, and we see that Rei has watched the match and that she's sorry and she instantly logs out. So something clearly has happened there that Rei would actually feel responsible for. And a small scene, but I really like its inclusion, is we see that Akino's in her room and she says that it's her turn to help Rei. This doesn't get followed up on, but I do like the continuity of Akino wanting to return the favour.
So I actually really like this portion as well, and it does feel again that what happens in one episode is actually starting to affect later on, which is something I always love in a series, obviously. So it was really nice, like you said, having Akino be there for Rei, and also that leads into later on. I really like how Akino and Hirana face the conversation that they have with Sanga and Madoka, where they also go, we're not that interested in her past, we're just interested in what she's like now, but if that is affecting her now, then we're also wanting to help with that. And I think that it shows that they've become a very powerful team, and those teething pains that we were having in earlier episodes, Akino and Hirana's troubles are now like all but gone, and they've all obviously come closer together and able to rely on each other.
Everything seems to have just been turned up one level. The story writing feels a lot stronger in this episode, able to not only pull stuff from earlier episodes, but introducing concepts and then also setting up for later episodes as well. So we see that in the real world, Hirana and Akino both get invited to Mujika's house, and in turn we learn that she's an Ojo-sama. For me, all of Diagram's designs are much better in the real world. I really like Mujika's purple hair here, it looks really nice, and just seeing her in the school uniform and she's drinking her tea and she's doing her desoirs. I actually really like the character.
It actually also reminds me of throwback to the original Wixoss. They're having that cake together that her nana brings her maybe gave me a bit of nostalgia for it, not completely. Starting to see of previous Wixosses here, and it was a bit of a nostalgia episode, I think, for me.
Yeah,
overall.
I don't think even that was intended to be a reference, but yeah, it does give me that nostalgic vibes. Another thing that I really like about Mujika is she's similar to Hirana and Akino. She's the outsider looking in. She doesn't really know the relationship between her own two teammates and No Limits one, because not every team is going to be on the same wavelength, and Hirana and Mujika fighting over cake was a nice little bit of fun. She is an Ojo-sama, but she is a bit of a dummy.
No, she's the best.
Hirana, Akino, and Mujika both confront Madoka and Sanga about their past history at school. We see that in the flashback that they are wearing the same school uniform that Hitoe wore in the original, and that in the present, Diagram's teams are actually wearing Shinetsu's uniform from Lost Storage. So that's pretty much every school uniform from all the series as before referenced, so I absolutely love it. So we see that in the flashback, Madoka was clearly infatuated with Rei, as she invited her to play Wixoss. Rei was already a diva at this point, and she was already a pro, while Sanga and Madoka were beginners. I'm interested to know when Sanga came in, because she wasn't there at that initial meeting, so what more role she has to play in the past I am interested to know. And we eventually learn that they became a team, and one day Rei just left them, and Sanga is framed very villainously in this scene. We see that as she's holding Madoka, she tells her that Rei abandoned them, and that she seems to be manipulating her into hating Rei. It reminded me very much of Urith toying with Akira's feelings in the original.
Yeah, it's like I was saying, it felt like Sanga is almost puppeteering something that's going on here. Obviously, we're not being shown the full picture here. If we were to go into theories, I'd probably assume that Sanga perhaps said something to Rei along the lines of, oh, we want to quit, you're too serious. And that's when Rei thought about breaking up. People are getting information that's not fully there.
Yeah, I mean, Madoka didn't hear anything from Rei. It's Sanga's the one that said, oh, she wants to be stronger and that we're too weak for her. Sanga seems to have the power of what was going on. We don't even know why Rei seemingly just called off contact at all. We don't know anything, and we don't learn in this episode either, so that is something that I'm interested to know going forward. Everyone's responses to the story. Mujika instantly believes her teammates, but she's not doing that because she's malicious. She doesn't really know Rei as a person like Hirana and Akino does, and this story corroborates with the absolute Rei rumours. So of course she wouldn't question it, of course she would instantly believe her teammates. It makes complete sense for her character. While Hirana and Akino don't get a chance to respond in this scene, but on the train back they clearly see that something is wrong with the story, because they do know Rei, they have spent time with her now, and she knows that she wouldn't discard them for being just weak. So I actually think that's amazing character writing.
I really like it because, as I said, we get Hirana and Akino both being like, oh, well, we care about what she's like now. Even if Rei was like that in the past, that doesn't affect them now, and they care for the Rei that's the Rei now. Either she was like that and she's changed, or she wasn't like that and she's the way she is. I think it's just Hirana and Akino taking the perspective that they've got now. I mean, you can't even imagine if Rei was as cold as what she was and what they're saying, why would she have helped Akino in that episode that Akino had? So it is really interesting to see what's going to happen with Rei, because Rei does seem genuinely apologetic, so maybe she did actually do something, so it's really interesting to see.
So Rei tries to call them during this scene, and Hirana's ringtone is set to Rei's song, as we already knew in the earlier scenes because Hirana mentioned that she's been listening to the song over and over again, and this instantly triggers Madoka. And again, it's really nice setup from the earlier scenes because it adds impact. We saw them bonding and they were really looking forward to producing this song, and then it has a negative connotation for Madoka here. Rei appears to have wrote that song for her past group, and Madoka takes it as an insult that she's using it for them. And I really love the framing of the three members of Diagram's emotional states in this scene. We see Mujika's neutral state, while we see Madoka's rage-filled anger, and then we see Sanga's calm smile, seemingly pleased with how everything's unfolded. So Rei hasn't been answering their calls, and Hirana and Rei are questioning the story on the train back, and they see Rei on the train, but they're unable to get to her. So Rei confronts Madoka on the same rooftop that they used to train together. We still don't get Rei's side of the story here, but she does appear to have indeed blocked Madoka for a year, and Rei says she won't apologise. So Rei clearly does feel guilty about something here because of the earlier scenes. There's obviously something that Rei also had a part in that caused this falling out.
I'm also wondering how close was Rei and Madoka's relationship for Madoka to be this, I don't want to say volatile, but anger-fueled towards Rei. I really really am interested to see what Ray did wrong and whether it was actually as big as it has been or whether it was spun out by a maybe web of lies by Sangha.
Madoka took Ray abandoning them very seriously, but I don't think it was helped by Sangha. That's obviously egged on her emotional state that it's reached a boiling point here. And we see that Ray challenges Madoka to a battle with the condition that she leaves her teammates alone if she wins. Madoka seems to be very jealous of Ray's feelings for the other two, and she can't understand why she would discard her for them. Ray's even willing to quit being a diva if she loses, which isn't what Madoka wants. Instead, she wants No Limit to never perform the song if Ray loses. Ray is reluctant, and Madoka pulls a very past Wixoss villainous smile. She agrees, and they draw the cards, and then they call out the iconic line, open. Episode ends. Really good cliffhanger, I thought.
I'm really interested to see whether this is going to be a one-on-one battle and how that's going to go. I'm actually hoping that, like in previous Wixoss, when they were going to become Eternal Girls, their body goes onto the table also, and we see their vacant body behind them. I'm wondering if it's going to be like that, where we're going to see their vacant bodies but their lyric forms on the table, or whether it's just going to be this version of open and this battle is actually going to come later and they're actually going to be on their teams fighting together.
The ending with them calling out, we see that the wind's picking up, and we even hear a very similar sound effect to the previous series. Is an original battle going to unfold, or is this just more dramatical framing for the audience? I think it's probably the later. I mean, I would be interested if they brought in the more magical aspects of the earlier series, but I don't know if they're going to introduce it now when there hasn't really been any build up. But it is definitely up in the air. I would definitely like to see the one-on-one battle, but I could also being it something that's brushed over in the next episode. I could see it being we see the aftermath first and then cutting back to it when needed in the next episode. One-on-one battle definitely does sound interesting. We've currently had the 3 vs 3.
It would be really interesting because, I mean, what if you could still do one-on-one battles, but because died out in the world of wanting to be with friends and having support there? That would be really interesting. This version of Wixoss died out and a new version opened up where it's evolved over time to adapt to the future. I think that's a really interesting thing that could go into there.
I'm assuming that the earlier formats, the one-on-one, are still playable, but just due to Diva being the new thing, they've not died out, but they're less popular, so less people focus on them. So overall, I thought this was an excellent episode. I thought it was well paced, it incorporated earlier episodes' developments into this one really nicely. It introduced 3 whole new characters who were all very incredibly interesting. Something that really helped with these 3 characters is they have more going on in the real world than in the virtual reality. We only really see Card Jockey and Universe's beginning mostly in the virtual reality, and we very rarely see them outside of it. And because of that, I feel that Diagram, they feel more invested in the story, and that makes them much more interesting adversaries for No Limit to face.
I think also because we've seen No Limit come off the back end of 2 losses at this point, it's intriguing to see what's going to happen next with this. They've been knocked down twice now. They've been knocked down by teams that they've previously beaten, so they could be in a very vulnerable place here. And obviously we've seen Diagram completely wipe the floor with Universe's beginning, and that's obviously foes that they've lost to it. So it's really interesting to see how the battle between these two are going to go forward. Genuinely can't tell whether they're going to win or lose because of the 2 losses that we've previously had.
We have lots of intrigue going into the next episode, and there are tons of unanswered questions. And we don't even really know how Hirana and Akino's role will play out in relation to Rei. These last few episodes for Diva Alive, I think, have done a really good job of turning the series around after a rather rocky beginning.
I remember at the beginning being like, oh, I'm wondering if I'm actually going to get attached to any of these characters or be invested in the story at all. And now I find myself hoping that characters come through things, and even like you said with the 3 new characters we got introduced, I'm intrigued and I want to know more about them, and we've only had 1 episode with them, so I'm super excited to see what's coming next.
So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Bye bye.